Welcome back to another video, and today we'll be doing my collective eyeshadow palette review for October. Welcome back, and today we are doing another collective eyeshadow palette review video. So I have accumulated again 5 palettes that I have had enough time to try out, and I can now do a conclusive review about them. If you're new to my channel, how I usually do my eyeshadow palette reviews, today we're having 5 palettes. That is usually the amount we have for these videos. However, sometimes we might have more, sometimes less, but today we're having the 5. And how this is gonna go, I will discuss each palette individually, and you will see then on the side over here a compilation. You're gonna see 3 looks, except one of these palettes is a smaller palette today, so with that one you're actually gonna see just 2. So you will see a image here with swatches and then 3 looks, and then with the smaller palette just two ones. And sometimes these are in a ranking order, but sometimes it's been that all the palettes have been very mediocre, or all of them have been as great as the other palettes. So today there is truly, I think, one palette that I'm actually gonna be decluttering after I filmed this one, because I truly was not happy with the quality of that one. But I'd say that all the other palettes, then I did have one clear favorite, which I'm gonna like save to the last, and then we had like 3 palettes that I liked on their own way, but they also all had some things that I then wasn't as excited about. But let's now get to the palettes and my looks with them and swatches. So first palette is a drugstore palette, and unfortunately I was not happy with this one, and I'm now having a bit concerns that this brand may be cutting back in terms of their formula quality, because this was actually a drugstore brand that I ranked the highest in my drugstore, from all the drugstore palettes I tried from, for example, during last year. So the palette we are discussing is MUA Makeup Academy Starlight eyeshadow palette, and this is actually one of their newest palettes in this bigger format, and this is how it's looking. So this palette is a, how should I say, it's a pinkish neutral palette is what I would call it, but actually when you really look at it, you don't get super pink looks with this one. So all the looks, and you will soon see that I will then discuss why I didn't like this too much. You kinda, when you look at the color story, I was thinking that okay, there's actually gonna be quite a lot of versatility with this one, but something that was maybe like what I had issue with during my time with this one was, for example, that we see there are 2 of these like what are they? How do you call these? These sort of like, are they like waxy, or I can't get the word now, but these sort of like shades that are very hard, like creamy shades that are very hard to pick out with a brush. And these 2 shades, they look very also similar on the eyes. The second thing, the issue that I'm having with this one, all the shimmer shades. So what MUA, and what's actually, because I do have a smaller MUA palette in this video that I liked much more, what I remembered MUA from last year was the fact that they had these like metallic, almost wet looking shimmers, but unfortunately these very sparkly shades, these are like, I'm gonna just like swatch them out, so maybe I'm not sure how well the camera is picking this up, but they are more sort of like toppery shades, and they are missing the sort of like wet metallic effect that, for example, the other smaller palette has, that I like much more with this one. And also regarding that, I do actually think the matte quality here is very on par with the other MUA palettes that I have tried, but my issue is that because the mattes combined with the shimmers that this has, you don't actually get that many looks. So now you're gonna see the swatches and the looks here, and yes, before you're asking, I did actually use different shades for these looks that you're seeing. But I think the biggest issue with this palette is that, unfortunately, because the sparkliest shimmery shades are all kind of like these topper shades that very much blend into the shadow you're using underneath, then we have these sort of the more opaque looking shimmer shades are these putty, yeah, that's the word I was looking. So then you have these sort of putty shades, and again, these really, you have to like rub your finger in quite hard to get the pigment out of this one, and these 2 putty shades, they look identical on your eyes. And I tried to like get some differentiation with this like red color over here, but then when you mixed it in with other shade, it actually still, the looks ended up looking, if I would have used this as a deepening up shade. So I was just very disappointed with this one, because as a color story this looked promising, and I was thinking that okay, that there's a couple of toppers, but maybe actually like This is still one of the metallic formulas, but again, it's very like lackluster, so yeah. Unfortunately, this was a very big disappointment, and I wouldn't recommend that if you're looking the MUA palettes, then this palette is not something that I would recommend. I think you will be just very disappointed, and as I said, this is going to be getting decluttered after I filmed this, because there's no use keeping this around, because I know that I won't be grabbing this one from my collection. So next, let's go to the 3 palettes that I thought that were that I think were quite, all of them I liked them. There were each of them had a couple of things that why they aren't exactly my absolute favorite, but they are palettes that I definitely want to have in my collection. Let's maybe then discuss the MUA palette that I actually like, and it's the smaller palette in this video. So from their 5 pans, because they do also these palettes in their plastic palettes in 5-pan format. So I bought the Desert Bloom palette, and this is a very sort of peachy neutral linen palette. And unlike with the, was it Starlight? Was it called Starlight? Yeah. So unlike with the Starlight palette, this has the beautiful sort of very metallic wet. I'm gonna swatch these to my fingers, and you can kind of see this is a completely different formulation, and I don't understand that why in their this new palette, why did they get rid of this one? It could be that they are no longer able to do this formula in their new palettes, which is such a shame, because I think this metallic formula is truly spectacular, especially considering how affordable it is. So I'm just gonna actually swatch the, you can see this is truly for drugstore or for any kind of a eyeshadow palette. This is awesome. Also the shimmer, the matte shades in this smaller palette are also very nice. They are the same good MUA quality, where they're very easy to blend and build. These can, there is a limit how much you can build this. So again, if you have someone who has a deeper skin tone, then maybe maybe consider that should you get a palette that maybe has deeper tones, because I did feel that while this has there's this deep matte here in this corner that for my skin tone it did build quite well, but I do know that maybe for someone who has a deeper skin tone you can't build that too much. You're gonna now see the swatches and the 2 eye looks, because it's a 5-pan and because the tones of this are quite, how should I say, they are quite peachy leaning and maybe a bit even similar to one another. You can get very beautiful peach neutral looks with this one. You can just pop in one of the shimmers and it's very beautiful and it's very impactful on the eyes. This is definitely one of those palettes that if you're someone who does your makeup on the go, I would get this one, because you can get very effortlessly a very beautiful looking eyeshadow look, and it will look that you would have spent hours on your makeup. So this is for those of you who are there's a certain color story you like, you maybe want it to be easy, something you can do when you're on in your car, or if you're using public transport and you still want it to be foolproof and want it to work and you don't want too much variety. So for those of you, I would recommend these 5-pans, and yeah, I'm just hoping that now that if MUA does more of these 5-pans, or if they do their bigger palettes, I really wish they would stick with the formulations they had this one and with the blush nudes palette, and they won't, and hopefully they won't continue with the formula that was in the Starlight palette, because that's just comparing these two, this was excellent, this was disappointing. But yeah, those were sort of my thoughts on the blush nudes, and let's get now to the next palette. Okay, the 2 next ones are actually gonna be a sort of very high-end releases. So let's first get to one of the palettes I actually got when I was traveling Dublin. So this was a trip that me and my husband, we did right in the between was it already in September? So yeah, it was between August and September, I think, was when we did the trip. So this is what I bought when I was traveling there. So this is the NARS palette, and I believe this was called Afterglow Irresistible was this palette's name. This is I'd say a relatively, it's not that old, but I think NARS came out with this one in the beginning of the year, and this is very sort of bronzy. You can now kind of think that, wait, you kind of have the Makeup Revolution iconic palette in your collection, doesn't it give the same looks? It kind of does, and I actually bought this after already having the palette, so we can then do maybe at the end of the year palette, when we're gonna do my collective palette ranking at the end of this year, was it very good idea that I already had the Makeup Revolution palette, which quality I liked a lot, and then I spent the money on NARS palette, and NARS certainly isn't cheap, so that's another discussion topic. But about this palette, so as you can see from the color story, this is a very bronzy pink heavy palette. Why I did want to try this out. First of all, NARS is one of those brands that's not that easily accessible for me. I have to order it online. On Dublin, they were actually selling it in one of their department stores, so I actually was able to see this real life before I bought this one. And why this was such a tempting palette for me was this sort of very sparkly formula that NARS has. So these shades over here were something that were pulling me in, and they looked very beautiful on store and when you sort of swatched this one. I would also have to say that after trying this out, I do think NARS has a pretty good matte formula. It is, I would say, a typical high-end matte formula in terms of the fact that it's more on the buildable side. You can build it and you can get quite of a intense looks with this one. And I'm gonna soon pop out the picture to the side, but just with the NARS, I would say that the matte formula, very typical high-end formula where you don't get that much pigment immediately, where it builds pretty quickly. But also the shimmer formulas were something that I was definitely thinking that actually looks quite pretty. You're gonna now see the image, and as you can see, this is very bronzy, pinkish. I'd say what my idea about this particular palette is that I'm just thinking that, okay, this is the extended version of Charlotte Tilbury's, not the original Pillow Talk, but the one that I have, which is the more intense version out of like the original Pillow Talk. So I was thinking quite a lot that I was getting similar vibes from this one than the small Charlotte Tilbury quad that I have. Something that, even though these sort of shimmers looked very sparkly, I can do a couple of swatches. So these are very beautiful. However, I would have to say that if you buy this palette, because even though this was, I think, a limited edition palette, you can still get this. But the shimmers, even though they look very nice and sparkly on the pan, they actually do kind of feel dry to the touch. They do build nicely on the eyes, and as you can see from the looks will be pretty bronzy, glamorous looks is what you're gonna get with this one. But just be prepared that even though the shimmers look super sparkly, they are a bit dry to the touch, and you do have to build them up a little bit to get the sort of full impact that I have in my looks for this one. Do I regret buying this, considering that I might actually have something in my collection at the drugstore price? Not really, because I do still think that, first of all, I wanted to have a NARS palette in my collection for sort of comparison purposes, but also just generally I do still think that, well, you get kind of bronzy or pinky looks with this one, but you can kind of get, from what you can see also from the images, that you can get a more sort of a deep bronzy look, and then you can get kind of something a bit more neutral. And I do think that this is still a pretty good high-end formula. It's certainly not anything exceptional in terms of high-end formulas, but I do still like the color stories and working with this particular formulation. So next is a palette that I bought as a way of stress buying, which is something that I would never recommend. Never, and especially don't buy high-end palettes in order to, as a stress relief. Like, that is expensive thing to do. But yeah, so this is basically the palette that I bought just before we left to Dublin. I bought this. This launched in the week previous to our trip, and I was kind of having a very busy week at work because I had to get everything done before we left the 1 week holiday with my husband. So I was stressed out. Then this was launched, and then I was thinking that, okay, yeah, why not? So we're talking about the Natasha Denona I Need a Warm palette, and this is not the second ABH palette. Sorry, not ABH. Why am I talking over? So this is the second Natasha Denona palette that I got now during this year in the newer formula. So during the summertime, and this palette has already been included in my collective eyeshadow palette review video. I got the I Need a Nude palette, and that was as a gift from my parents when they were traveling, and then I bought the I Need a Warm myself, and this is how it looks like. So there's been now quite a lot of reviews of this one, so if you like, probably I don't know if it's gonna be any new information that I'm gonna be telling you about the formula of this one. I would say that the formula is very on par with Natasha Denona's other formulas. I'm actually gonna just now copy directly the sort of, you can see my looks and swatches of this one. So I do think the formula is pretty close to what Natasha Denona has done in her other other palettes before this one, and I do think the shimmer shades in this one are very on par with the I Need a Nude palettes. I do think the addition of the multi-chrome shade, so this had one of the, it's the Phenomena shade over here. So I do think it was a nice addition to the palette. It's in order to get it to be as impactful as Natasha Denona made it look in her promotional images, you do have to layer it quite a bit, but I do think that you can get some versatility with this one. I'm actually thinking that despite the fact that the I Need a Nude in terms of undertones is a more suitable palette for me because I have a cool rosy undertone. However, there was something about maybe the fact that I think is the fact that I don't, because with the I Need a Nude I had the issue that I felt that I ran out of mattes quite quickly, which is why I felt that while I did like the looks that I got with it, I didn't feel that I got that many of them. With this one I do feel that something that I don't have the same issue, that I am like continuously like having to use the same mattes over and over again, and I do feel that I actually like this bit more than the I Need a Nude. Even though these sort of peachy, almost like yellow leaning neutral tones aren't maybe as suitable for my particular skin undertone, but I just think that I like this actually a bit better than the I Need a Nude palette. Is this still a super versatile palette? No, this is still very much so that there's like a couple of, you can get a more sort of, you can get a bit more orangey look, then you can get some kind of variation of a warm toned neutral look with this one. I do appreciate the fact that you can get like quite nice, there is like enough depth in this one, so there's actually quite many mid-tone and even like deeper brown shades in this one, so you don't have the issue that you don't have like deepening up shades, which is something that's quite important for me, because if then there's too many like lighter and mid-tone shades, then that can also be an issue, at least with my makeup preferences. So I know a lot of people have been asking that do you actually meet this if you have the I Need a Nude, but I think that depends a lot on your preferences. I do think the I Need a Nude in one way is that if you just because with the I Need a Nude I felt that there was only like, I felt with that one that I didn't get as many looks that I got with the I Need a Warm. So I think the I Need a Nude is for someone who just wants something quick and something they don't have to think about. I do think that with this one, with options comes also the fact that okay, this maybe has been more options, so maybe again, even though this is a very easy palette to create looks with, but I do think that with this one also you do have bit, maybe because there's the multi-chrome, you have a bit more options, so I think it's very depending on your individual preferences, but I think with these palettes you should maybe more approach them that do they fit your skin undertone and what kind of makeup that do you lean more towards cool tone makeup or warm tone makeup. I think having both the palettes in my collection, the I Need a Nude and I Need a Warm, I certainly think they have a place in time, and for me it didn't feel that I had too much of the same thing. But if you have a huge Natasha Denona collection of her other especially neutral leaning palettes, then I wouldn't maybe necessarily go immediately to buy this one unless you're planning to declutter the older palettes and you want the newer formula. So if you have a huge Natasha Denona collection and you just want a sort of upgrade to the newer formula, then I would maybe do so that you declutter some of the older palettes and then replace some of them by buying this one. But if you just have the other sort of warm toned neutral palettes or the neutral palette that she has done previously and you don't plan to get rid of those ones, then I maybe would hold back and wouldn't yet buy this one. But yeah, those were sort of my thoughts. I do think that as this was like from the sort of like middle group palettes, this was still actually the one that I liked the most, even though it probably wasn't the most exciting one. But yeah, lastly I'm gonna show what was my sort of favorite palettes from these 5 palettes that I was able to review. So my top palette was actually an indie palette, and this was maybe, I liked this much more than I expected. So from Monolith Shop's launch that I think happened during September, I did buy one thing from the launch, and it was the Unity palette from Adept Cosmetics, and this was one of their like bigger palettes, and this is how the palette looks. So this is a sort of neutral pink mauve leaning palette. Unlike a lot of other Adept palettes, what you should immediately know about this one, that this only has one individual multichrome in it, so it is this sort of yellow, yellow looking shade. I don't know how it looks on the screen actually, but it's this one here. All the other ones here are that they might have a bit of a duochrome effect, but a lot of them are just like normal shimmers, and then we actually have these sort of 5 mattes here at the bottom here. And I actually like this much more. I'm now gonna pop out the images and the sort of swatches, and I knew before buying this one that this you wouldn't have a super lot of these sort of multi-chromes that some other Adept palette had. This was also less expensive than some of the other Adept palettes because a lot of them are basic shimmers. And I kind of bought this as a comfort thing, so I was thinking that I could really like do with the palette like this one, but I also knew it wasn't going to be anything super extraordinary in my collection. But I actually, for example, like this in terms of the fact that this has a shimmer formula that's not one of these flaky or chunky indie shimmers, but it's actually a very nice smooth shimmer formula that actually had a very good lasting power on my lids. I think in all the days that I used this particular palette, not in any of the days I had the issue at the end of the day that the shimmers had creased or anything. So if you have avoided other Adept palettes previously because of the shimmers not working for your eyelids, maybe try out this one, because these ones were easy to apply. They weren't like, you didn't need any finicking, they blended in very nicely. And I do think that the looks that I was able to get with this one were very beautiful. The shimmers were definitely a winner for me in this one, even though they weren't the most like shifty or multi-chrome shimmers, but I also do think that I have enough those in other palettes if I want that kind of shimmers. So my biggest gripe with the Samarian Sunset palette that was in this sort of similar bigger format last year was that the matte shades weren't good. And I was kind of hoping that because it had been over a year from my last Adept palette that maybe they had now done something with the matte formula. And my answer to that one is yes and no. So I do think that this is better. So the 5 mattes in the bottom here, they are definitely like, I think they are a bit better than in the Samarian Sunset one. The only very dud matte shade in this one, unfortunately, is the darkest purple, which is also pretty because this is the only purple you can get like matte shade that you can get depth with this palette. And unfortunately that one for me, I could get it work, and I actually might have used it in some of these looks that you're seeing, in one of these looks that you're seeing, I can't remember now on top of my head which one it was. But with the deep purple matte in this palette, I did feel that it unfortunately was patchy to work with. I also had a bit hard time getting it to build up. So that's the only that I would truly say a dot shade in this one. I do think that the 4 other shades, even these like pale 2 shades over here, because we do remember that with the Samarian Sunset I had the issue that 2 pale shades, those didn't build up at all. Those were like complete dots. They were like just putting powder on my lids, nothing happening. These ones did build, however, it's still not what I would say that if you like these very pigmented indie mattes, then this matte formula is still not, I think, a formulation for you. The matte formula definitely I think still needs work, and I don't mean this now in a way that it should be like very pigmented immediately, because I do know that everyone has different kind of preferences. I actually also do like that when there's bit maneuverability with my mattes, but just when I think about generally what kind of mattes I like, I would really want that you can get a more sheer layer with the matte, and then on the second application then it starts to build. And with this one, the mattes in this one, I did feel that you did have to do a bit more building with them, but at least now they weren't complete dots, and only, like as I said, the only deepest one was like what I thought that they would have to go back to a drawing board with that one. So maybe with this palette, if you get it, you might still have to, I'm gonna show it, yeah. So you might still have to reach for other mattes, but other than that, I do think that this was actually a pretty good release from Adept, especially if you haven't been liking their shimmer formulations before. If you want these super shifty shimmers, then this is not the palette for you, so that's something to consider. But if you just like beautiful, sparkly, impactful shimmer shades, especially in this sort of pinky, mauvish neutral tones, then I think the Unit palette is a good option. and the mattes are now, I think, better. They could still do a bit improving because you do still have to layer them a bit. And with the deep one, that's something that I hope they will fix maybe with the other palettes in the future. But I do think that with the Unity palette, I did feel every time I wore it that the looks were very beautiful, and I actually was eyeing the mirror at how sparkly the shimmers were looking, but also the fact that the shimmers lasted very long. So yeah, those were sort of my conclusive thoughts about the Unity palette. So those were all the palettes that I had for this review video. Comment down below, have you tried any of these palettes and what did you think about them? I do have to say that despite like one of the palettes being that, I generally did like all the other 4 palettes, so they are definitely staying in my collection. We did have maybe a bit of a neutral, like aside from the Adept, and even the Adept palette was still like a bit neutral leaning for the brand, so I think we're definitely still in my sort of neutral palette era. We will see how that's gonna progress as we're gonna approach at the end of the year, but yeah, we are, I think still we might be having some neutral palettes also in my review videos for future. About these videos, because it does take time for me to get to do these, I'm gonna say that if we're gonna have the last one of these for this year during November or in the beginning of December, or am I gonna be able to, because it takes 2 weeks for me to have a palette in my rotation and then collect enough palettes for one video, so we will have to see in terms of timing that am I gonna still be able to make 1 or 2 of these before the end of the year. And also at the end of the year I will then have my declutter videos and ranking videos, so those also take some filming time, so we will have to see how many of these I will be doing. But if you like this video, push the like button, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell button if you want to get notifications from my future content. You can also find me with the same nickname, Makeup Hedgehog, on Instagram. I hope I'll be seen again soon in the video. Bye bye!